Marx lived in the 19th century, and he was particularly concerned with what was happening as so many people poured into the new cities and what was happening with agriculture. One of his insights, very important insights, was that what was happening was there was a movement from natural forms of fertilizer to chemical fertilizers. And this is what he calls the new rift. That people's relationship to the land was being broken. Mm-hmm. It was being industrialized, it was being mediated by chemicals. Instead of using firewood or water, natural forms of power, mm-hmm. wind power, windmills, water mills, sure. we used coal and then later oil.
Did he see any answers or clues to answers to this problem in his mind?
No, because he was very good at analysing what was in front of him. He was a little bit vague about the future. So you cannot read Marx for a kind of diagram of what the future should look like. Mm-hmm. Basically, his idea of the future society was a future of cooperation and a future of a more cooperative relationship with natural resources. So he was very sensitive to that. But unfortunately, he never elaborated his ideas very clearly on that.
Mm-hmm. Now, we are talking about a kind of a reversal of the situation, right? Now we're trying to go back from the fossil fuel, back to the natural sources of energy you were describing. How do you look at the present stage?
I think we're at a crucial moment of. It could go either way. We're going back to those forms of energy that were dominant in the pre-industrial era: wind, sun power, mm-hmm. Water, and so on. That's absolutely necessary. There's a very important scientific paper written by an American, Michael Mann, and what they did was to try to measure the temperature of just above the Earth's surface over 400 years. Mm-hmm. What it shows that up until the end of the 19th century, you have a more or less flat, it's a little bit variation, then it suddenly shoots up. Yeah. It's called the hockey stick because it's got that shape. So we know that that's happened, and more recent analysis shows it's got much worse since the 1970s. We're accelerating global warming. The question is, can we stop it? And that's very debatable. Maybe we can't. Some scientists believe we can't, but we can make it much slower.
That's what governments have been trying to do, and that's why we had this very famous Paris climate change meeting, which produced this Paris Agreement. However, we're seeing positions of big countries shifting at this moment from the United States. President Donald Trump has signed executive order to roll back Obama-era greenhouse gas emission regulations, and also he threatened to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. China's position has been consistent. Chinese President Xi Jinping said in Davos that we must stick to the Paris Agreement instead of walking away from it. What do you think of big countries' role in combating climate change, and what do you think of the different positions?
I would applaud very much the Chinese position. That's absolutely the right thing to do. The big countries have a double responsibility. First of all, they are themselves big contributors to carbon emissions, but more than that, they have a leadership role, because if they don't do anything, smaller countries will say, well, why should we bother? Yeah. And that's why Trump's decision is so important, because people say, well, the United States is not going to do it. Why should we do it? Mm-hmm. And so it's a disaster, an absolute disaster.
Yeah. Well, he has also been talking about bringing jobs back to the United States, to reopen the coal mines and starting these jobs in the coal-powered manufacturing jobs. What do you think of that? Is it feasible, first of all, and is it wise?
No, it's not feasible. If you look at all the evidence, the coal industry has been declining for some time. There will not be very many jobs in the coal industry. Also, it's becoming more and more mechanized. So they're using machines. Mm-hmm. So it's a fantasy. The more productive thing to think about is how to have ecologically sustainable jobs. And actually, the new energy systems are creating a lot of jobs. Coal mining will have to disappear, but that doesn't mean to say those people cannot have any jobs. They can have jobs in clean energy. Mm-hmm. So I think the the more advanced thinking in the United States is to think about reorienting the economy, not just around clean energy to supply other sectors, but itself as a major industrial system.
Yes.
Solar panels, wind power, and so on.
Right now, we know that the concentration of capital has led to these giant multinational corporations, and often in the oil and gas industries. What is the impact of capitalism on climate change, and why is it so hard to switch from oil back to more natural resources?
Well, my next book is called Carbon Capitalism. Capitalism is the problem. When capitalism originated, there was a decision to use coal as the major source of power, and then later oil. Remember, the very first automobiles, the very first cars, were actually electric cars. They weren't driven by the internal combustion engine. And it was because oil was discovered in California that they decided to switch to that system, because the oil companies wanted a market for their oil. So we could have had electric cars at the beginning of the 20th century. Imagine what that difference that might have made. Well, what you have are these enormously powerful companies that have been there a long time, and they have incredible political influence, particularly in the United States. Yeah. And so it's very difficult to shift the politics, because certainly on the Republican side of the US political spectrum, the oil industries and the coal industries have incredible amount of power. And a lot of the representatives of a lot of the Republican representatives in Senate and Congress come from regions where those are incredibly important industries. Yeah. And so they feel that they must defend them. So you have a kind of political blockage. Everybody knows that the science tells us that this is not sustainable, but the science doesn't determine politics.
Science doesn't have the lobbying power.
No.
That
so
the
it doesn't have
have.
the lobbying
Yeah.
power.
What about the digital media? We don't have the lobbying power, but we are very influential. We reach people when we are, allowed to. What is the role of digital media on climate crisis?
Well, actually, highly problematic. This is a very old. I feel ashamed to own this, but this machine. When you see the advertisements for this, you're not encouraged to ask, where does this come from? This is made up of resources that have to be mined, have to be manufactured. The machine itself has to be made in a factory. It has to be transported, probably on a container ship. And when you use it, you're using a huge amount of energy.
However, the problem really is, and people replace them even before they become defunct.
That's the other problem. That we've been encouraged to throw things away almost on every year. Yeah. There's a new model. Yeah.
But there's no way to stop that if you look at the reality. Is there a way? Because everybody is trying to get ahead with the latest new gadget. I mean, that's the problem, maybe.
It is a huge problem, but I'm old enough to remember when we didn't do that. When we had a radio and it did all the things you wanted it to do, and you kept it. My family kept their radio for 20 years.
Well, people do turn to listening to radio, but they listen to the radio on their digital devices.
Well, this is part of an overconsumption system. Yes, it's not just this. We are consuming too much, and the resources are just not there. One statistic: if everybody in the world enjoyed the same average standard of life as the citizen of California, you would need 5 more planet Earths. We only have 1. So we cannot carry on consuming in this way.
So we have a real paradox. I mean, on the one hand, we want everybody's life to improve, and that in today's world will have to be done through the digital way, more or less, and the digital economy is becoming more and more important. On the other hand, we also have this environmental problem. Where is the way out?
Well, one is about how you measure a good society. At the moment, or a successful society, at the moment we measure it in terms of productivity, gross national product. But we could measure it in terms of quality of life. And if you measured it in terms of quality of life, then you have a different ranking of societies. Some poorer societies, people are much happier, they have a much better quality of life socially and personally. So that's one thing. Maybe we have to think about what we're aiming for, not just more and more productivity, but a quality of social life. The other thing is, for me, I grew up in Britain when we had a lot of state ownership of key facilities like the telephone network and so on. Mm-hmm. I think we have to go back to much stronger regulation of these facilities and much stronger public intervention. You need an internet, but who should control it and who should be accountable? I certainly don't think it should be Google and Facebook. So I think we have to, in a way, go back to that idea. There are certain key resources that support all of our lives that should be held in common. They should not be...
That's free, that's public, that's good for everybody.
Yes, and they should be regulated in the public interest, not just to make money.
Mm-hmm. Finally, how can we build a better communication system, meaning public opinion in this regard, to help regulate the climate change?
It's interesting that in recent months, scientists have begun to form themselves into an organization. They're so depressed by the bad coverage or the stupid coverage of scientific ideas, they're now going to be proactive and collaborate with journalists and so on. And as people who are primarily responsible for communication, myself in the university and you in a much bigger forum, we have a particular responsibility to make the evidence available to people, but also to explain the arguments. If we do not do it, no one will do it.